And we welcome you into another edition of the best podcast available. I'm Jason Gibbs. He's Nick Shook. He's Andrew Gribble. And we are getting you ready for the Browns' first divisional opponent in 2019 as the Brown and Orange get set to head to Baltimore to take on the Baltimore Ravens, who are in first place currently in the AFC North at 2-1. Gentlemen, a tough task again for the Cleveland Browns. We're in the middle of a number of tough tasks, I feel like. But this one being a division foe, there's a little bit added incentive on this one.
Yeah, I feel like the hits don't stop coming with the schedule, which we knew going into the season. We knew the Rams were going to be a good team. Tennessee surprised us, got the win in New York, and now we're going to go to our first divisional game against a Baltimore team that is better than people expected so far. We'll see where that lands by the end of the season, but at this point right now, they're on the top of the division. Lamar Jackson looks like he's taken the next step. They took their first loss last week to a very good Chiefs team, as we all know, and they'll be coming home looking for maybe some redemption against a familiar opponent that they took down late last year. So this is a game that, you don't want to name any game a must-win at this point, and we're not going to name this one a must-win, but it would go a really long way for the Browns if they could pull this one out.
Yeah, the Ravens have easily been the best team in the AFC North so far, and that's because they've won the games they're supposed to. I think at the beginning of the season, if you would have looked at your schedule, you would have predicted them to be 2-1 at this point because they're going to Miami, they hosted Arizona, and then they played the Chiefs in a tough game. So I think the thing we learned most about this team, honestly, might have been how they played Week 3. Because I take nothing out of Week 1 when they did to the Dolphins what I think a lot of teams could do to the Dolphins.
And will do.
I think they scored more points than maybe some of the other teams, but I think other teams went into those games with a plan to take the foot off the gas a little bit more. And then the Cardinals game, they won a game they were supposed to, and kind of it was a normal football game. They got an early lead, and they hung on at the end and made the plays they were supposed to. So I thought them competing with the Chiefs, hanging with them, ultimately they fell in a pretty big hole and then had to climb out of it. Lamar Jackson did a lot of the things you like what you see, but then he also struggled at some points. He was, I think, at one point in the game, 8 of 20 for 75 yards throwing the ball. So to me, this is as much a reflection. We'll see what the Ravens really are after this game as much as we'll see what the Browns are.
When you take a look at the Baltimore Ravens offensively and Lamar Jackson, what do you see from him in terms of the biggest improvement from year 1 to year 2? Gribble, we'll start with you.
I think he's a more accurate passer. He still has some inaccurate throws that are just going to be part of the deal. I think it's part of the deal with Josh Allen in Buffalo. I mean, he's a better passer, but there's going to be ones where it's like, okay, that's just what he does sometimes. But I think the huge difference is ultimately they spent the entire offseason building the offense around him and surrounding him with skill players and running backs that we've not seen on the Ravens in a long time. I mean, this was a franchise that struggled to get playmakers at wide receiver, and they've always had 1,000 tight ends, but they've got a couple of good ones that really help out Lamar Jackson. And a story on Ravens.com this week, or BaltimoreRavens.com. Do not go to Ravens.com. It's like a link to an Amazon page. But BaltimoreRavens.com, they had the headline that Lamar Jackson has Baker Mayfield's 2 biggest weapons from college, and that they've got Marquise Brown, they have Mark Andrews, and those are 2 big playmakers that have really changed this offense and really cater to his strengths, which is, lull the teams to sleep by running the ball and then all of a sudden hit them over the top. So that's what they're doing, and I think they've really just they've gone all in with Lamar Jackson and built the team around him. Whether or not it's sustainable for a long time remains to be seen, but this is a very good constructed offense as it is now.
I think you credit Ozzie Newsome for his final draft last year in which he landed Lamar Jackson and also took Mark Andrews. He took a couple tight ends. He also took Hayden Hurst. And then you also give credit to Eric DeCosta, their new GM, because he's done, taking the next step and really said, all right, well, if this is going to be our guy, we're going to build our entire team around him, like Gribble said. And I think that has created what I've noticed the most in Lamar Jackson this year from year 1 to year 2 is comfort. He looks a lot more comfortable being on the field. Last year, it was middle of the season, you're taking over, and you're just going to figure it out on the fly, and that's why you saw him, running a good amount. That's why you saw basically John Harbaugh change the entire offense in the middle of the season. Was just like, all right, well, this instead of doing what we did with Flacco before, we're going to kind of turn to a little bit of a collegiate offense.
An amazing turnaround.
Yes, and you saw them running speed option and different read options and stuff like that where you could really take advantage of Lamar's mobility and keep defenses honest. Now you've had an entire offseason to really build it around him. You've added key pieces that would complement him. And, oh, by the way, one of the better free agent additions in the offseason that people didn't really pay attention to at the time, Mark Ingram, who's having a really good start to this season for this team, as expected, and I think it's just allowed Lamar to really step fully into his role as the franchise quarterback and get a lot more comfortable, and it's going to be a big challenge for the Browns.
All right, so here's my question for you. What's been the bigger addition on offense for them, Marquise Brown or Mark Ingram?
Well, it's got to be Mark Ingram, and people are probably going to disagree with me on that because Marquise Brown is the receiving end of the highlight play, the big play. But over the course of the season, I'm always a big proponent of making sure that you have a reliable running game because it can just open up so much more. And I think even more when you have a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, because then you have two running threats on the field at the same time every time they're out there. Not to mention you can have Marquise Brown out there, but you can also have other receivers out there who can do that job. Mark Andrews can kind of go down the seam and take advantage of a mismatch with a linebacker, but they're not going to be they're not going to give you the opportunity to do that in the passing game if you don't have a reliable running game. Gus Edwards did a lot last year out of nowhere. He's still there, but Mark Ingram is on a different level, and I think he really brings the needed balance to their offense to allow them to get closer to their full potential.
Gibbs, I know you play Guess the Stats a lot on CBD.
Good and terrible.
I would like you to play Guess the Wide Receivers on the Baltimore Ravens.
After Marquise Brown?
Yeah.
Willie Snead.
Willie Snead is still there. Willie Snead's still there. So they have.
There you go.
Good night, everybody.
This is just how different this offense is set up than the Browns. I mean, 25 of their 69 completions have gone to wide receivers. 14 of those 25 have gone to Marquise Brown. The rest have been spread around to Willie Snead, who has 6 receptions, Seth Roberts with 3, and Miles Boykin with 2. That's it.
And
So they're reliant on their tight ends, Nick Boyle and Mark Andrews, who have a combined 27 receptions. Mark Ingram has 6 catches. Hayden Hurst, another tight end, has 6 catches. So they've, like I said, the Ravens have always had 1,000 tight ends. Like they're
always all almost the same.
Yeah, they load them up on the field.
Yep.
Mark Andrews has clearly emerged as the big guy this year, but he also hasn't practiced this week. So that's the biggest injury on their side, also with Jimmy Smith to keep an eye on, because if they don't have Mark Andrews, that's a huge weapon missing from that passing game.
All right, speaking of Jimmy Smith and that defense, we already know they're already down 1 DB out for the year with a neck injury. Jimmy Smith, I think, will not play. There's a chance he could, but
he hasn't practiced this week either, and he's missed the last couple games.
Exactly, and from what they were saying, it was a 3 to 4 week injury. If you look at what some of the Ravens beat reporters have been saying, that secondary is a little vulnerable defensively. You know, I mean, you don't have to worry about Suggs across the line from you. Mosley no longer there.
Yeah.
This is a different defense, but the defense that still has played fairly well through the first 3 games, although Kansas City torched them pretty good on Sunday.
Yeah, it still has some punch, especially in the linebacking core. I'm a big fan of Patrick Owasso, who, you know, was kind of an unknown guy who has risen in the last couple of years to be a key player on that defense. And they've still got some studs on the inside of their, the interior defensive line. So, I mean, it's not, they lost Zadarius Smith and they lost C.J. Mosley. And, they had the attrition. Suggs goes to Arizona. You lose those pieces. Yeah, but you don't let those guys walk unless you're confident in the guys that you have or the moves that you're able to make to replace them. And this is still basically almost the same staff that's there. And this is an established franchise. I mean, this is not a team that has undergone a ton of change in the last year, even if some of the names are different. But there are some contributors who are gone. So perhaps mixed in with the injuries, you could take advantage of this and finally get that offense on track.
They gave up a bunch of yards, the Cardinals, too.
They did.
They just tightened up on the goal line, and they were fortunate to see that. I think the Cardinals settled for a lot of short field goals. They didn't even try to go into the end zone on some of these. So, yeah, I mean, it's weird to talk about this Baltimore defense being one that's maybe not one of the toughest on your schedule. But if you look at it so far, I think this might be the one that is the most vulnerable so far of these first 4 that the Browns are going to face.
It is amazing what John Harbaugh has continued to do. And I feel like we went into that game last year against them, and it was almost a make-or-break game for them. Like, they needed to get into the playoffs, obviously.
Yeah,
they needed to win to get into the playoffs. But it was almost like, do they need to win to save his job? He went on that little run at the end of the year, but midway through the year, we were saying, is he going to be back? What's going on? And he just continues to churn out wins. And the reason why I think they're able to just let those guys go on defense is because they have the culture and they have the program in place, and it's just plug and play.
Right. I mean, if we compare the 2 games that we played against them last year, the first one was early in the season. They still had Flacco at quarterback. You win on an ugly field goal from Greg Joseph to get that that home win. And the Ravens are they're foundering or whatever. They're in some trouble. Then you come back and they've changed their quarterback and they've gone on this run. And even if the Browns had won that game last year, I still think that Harbaugh would still be in a good position because he'd done such a good job in the middle of the season of turning around his team with a different quarterback and just saying, you know what, we're going after it with this guy and we're just going to change who we are. That's the difference between a coach who makes guys fit into his system as opposed to coaches who will change their system for the personnel that they have. And I think they've taken that next step this year. And the other thing is organizational stability. He probably didn't feel as if he had the breathing room to be able to do that, but I don't think he thought he had any other choice than to do that. And it paid off for him. And he was allowed to show that, this is the strength of my skills. This is why I'm a head coach in the NFL. And it looks like he's bought himself a lot of goodwill since then.
It's ideal timing to have an offensive coordinator like the one they do with Greg Roman, who, he did this exact same offense with the 49ers and Kaepernick. I mean, so it's all kind of worked out together, but like we said earlier, the investment that they've gone all in with Lamar Jackson, I mean, you couldn't find two more opposite quarterbacks than Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson. Like, they're pretty different in terms of mobility, just everything. And I think that that offense last year with Flacco was a mess. I mean, they've kept Snead, but they had a bunch of wide receivers that other teams didn't want. With Michael Crabtree, John Brown, and even Willie Snead. I mean, they're all guys that teams didn't want. Mark Andrews was a rookie, and Hayden Hurst is kind of underperformed as a first-round pick. So they just didn't have much going on. And who is even their starting? And then Alex Collins was their running back at the start of the season. He's not even on the team anymore. So, I mean, it's a completely different offense. And even, I would say, a very different offense than the one the Browns faced even Week 17 last year with Lamar Jackson running it.
As we wrap up our preview of the Ravens, special teams always been a strength. Harbaugh being a former special teams coach and coordinator. Jerry Rossberg's no longer there. His top assistant is. They've had a lot of success. As Mike Prefer said today in his press conference, they have the best kicker in the NFL in Justin Tucker. Special teams will play a factor in Sunday's game, as it has in past Browns-Ravens games. You can count on it.
Yeah, and having that best kicker in the NFL is a weapon. Whether people, whatever you think about a kicker or not, that's a weapon. They also have a good punter, Sam Cook. So either way you look at it, whether they're punting you the football or they're trying to put points on the board, they are dangerous against you. And this is a Browns team that has completely turned around its special teams unit thanks to Mike Prefer this season, and it's been really one of their strengths. But they're going to have a worthy adversary on the other side of the field in Baltimore, and we'll see. Maybe a long Tucker kick ends up being the difference, or maybe a punt return or something like that ends up being the difference. The Browns haven't had a lot of kicks returned on them this year. Hopefully they can continue that and take that out of the game.
You blocked his kick last year, and that sent the game to overtime, essentially. I mean, that allowed you to go to overtime.
Denzel Ward.
Yeah, I mean, so that might be the only kick he's ever missed against the Browns, it seems like, at least. So, I mean, it's one of those where you have to it makes your offense that much more important, because anytime that they get inside the 35, they're probably going to come away with some points. So that's the way the Ravens have done this the last few years. I mean, the field goals weren't going to do it against the Chiefs, but they'll be in a different mode against the Browns, I think, this week.
All right, that's our look at the Baltimore Ravens as we get ready for Browns-Ravens week number 4 in the National Football League. For our interview of the week and our keys to the game, you're going to have to keep listening to the best podcast available. The video part is over, but you can subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you do subscribe to the best podcast available. Rate us, rank us, give us your feedback. All are welcome. For Andrew Gribble, for Nick Shook,